On a blazing Los Angeles morning, Thomas Livingstone had just stepped out of the mirrored tower that bore his name when something small, no, someone small, brushed past him and vanished into the noise. Instinctively, his hand went to his jacket. The pocket was light, empty. His wallet, gone. For a moment he froze, scanning the flow of people, the blur of taxis, the street vendors shouting over the hum of traffic. Then he saw her, a flash of yellow darting between legs, tiny, fast, impossible. "Hey!" His voice cut through the morning bustle, deep, commanding, used to being obeyed. But no one stopped. The girl didn't even glance back. She weaved through the crowd with practiced grace, slipping through bodies like smoke. Thomas's blood surged. In all his years managing billions, building companies, dismantling competitors, no one had ever gotten away with taking something from him. His instinct for control, the same one that built his empire, took over. Without a second thought, he bolted after her. The heat pressed down like glass. Downtown Los Angeles shimmered with motion and money, the rhythmic hum of traffic, the clink of coffee cups, the metallic pulse of business. People in suits strode with purpose. Screens reflected off windows, showing stock tickers and headlines that meant everything to men like Thomas. He was one of those men, 40, fit, immaculate. His charcoal suit hung crisp on his frame, his silver tie perfectly aligned. Even his wristwatch, a limited edition Patek Philippe, gleamed as if it kept not just time but power. Every step he took was calibrated, every glance calculated. He didn't just manage capital, he managed order. Until that moment. The girl darted left into a side street, bare feet slapping the concrete. She couldn't have been more than 5, her small frame nearly swallowed by a faded yellow dress 2 sizes too big. Her hair, a mass of tight curls, bounced as she ran, disappearing between food stalls and delivery trucks. Thomas charged after her, dodging a fruit cart, ignoring a taxi horn that blared inches from his knee. He hadn't run like this in years. His lungs burned, heart pounding in protest beneath his pressed shirt. Sweat gathered at his temples. "Stop," he barked again. "Stop right there." But the girl moved like she'd been running her whole life. Pedestrians turned to watch the absurd sight. A billionaire in a $1,000 suit sprinting through the street after a child half his height. Some laughed. Others just stared. Thomas didn't care. He couldn't lose her. She turned sharply down a narrow alley between 2 old buildings, graffiti-scarred walls, the smell of trash and sun-baked oil. He followed, his polished shoes slipping slightly on the uneven ground. At the far end of the alley, she jumped over a broken pallet, her small legs trembling from the effort. Then her sandal strap snapped. She stumbled, landing on her hands and knees beside a rusted dumpster. The wallet slid from her grip, but she grabbed it instantly, clutching it to her chest like it was oxygen. Thomas slowed, chest heaving, his shadow stretching over her. The anger that had fueled him began to falter, replaced by something unfamiliar, a flicker of confusion. She looked up. Big brown eyes. Tear-streaked cheeks. No defiance, just fear. Her lower lip quivered as she took a shaky step backward, the wallet still pressed tight against her small body. Her bare feet were dirty, scraped raw at the heels. She looked so tiny against the towering dumpster, so fragile it was almost painful to look at her. Thomas's throat tightened. He didn't speak for a moment. His pulse still hammered, but not from anger anymore. Something else was happening. Something that made no sense to a man who had spent decades mastering control. For a heartbeat, he just stood there. The world around him went quiet. No horns, no chatter, just the sound of his own breath and the trembling whimper of the little girl who had stolen from him. He could call the police. He could reclaim his wallet, walk away, and be done with this absurd scene. But his hand, the one reaching for his phone, didn't move. She was staring at him, not like a criminal caught, but like a child cornered by the world. And that was when the absurdity of it all hit him. A billionaire chasing a barefoot child down a dirty alley for a wallet that probably meant her survival. He took a step closer. She flinched. "Give it back," he said, his voice lower now, steady but not sharp. She hesitated, clutching it tighter. It wasn't defiance. It was desperation. A single tear rolled down her cheek and fell onto the leather surface of the wallet, leaving a small dark stain. Her voice, when it came, was barely a whisper. "Please, mister. I didn't mean to." Thomas froze. Those words, simple, trembling, cut through his anger like glass through silk. The man who negotiated billion-dollar mergers suddenly didn't know what to say. He looked around, the cracked walls, the flickering light overhead, the smell of old food and gasoline. The city felt different now. Sharper, realer. And when he saw what she was holding and the tears that followed, Thomas Livingstone's entire world went silent. Welcome to Tales of an Observer, where truth, dignity, and courage meet in the stories we can't afford to forget. Now, before we get deep into the story, I would love to request a little favor from you. Please hit that subscribe button, like this video, and leave a comment telling me the city where you're watching from around the world. And also, please share this story with your loved ones. Now, let's get back into the story and see what unfolds. The girl didn't run again. She just stood there, silent and trembling, as Thomas caught his breath. Her tiny fingers loosened around the wallet, revealing a small piece of paper tucked inside, a torn grocery receipt scribbled with childish handwriting. Medicine. When she looked up again, her eyes weren't pleading for forgiveness. They were begging for understanding. And that was when Thomas realized this wasn't about theft at all. This was survival. He exhaled slowly, the city's noise returning like a wave, and the man who had always believed he understood value suddenly wasn't so sure what that word meant anymore. The girl clutched the wallet again, holding it close like a shield. Her thin shoulders trembled, her lips pressed tight as if she were bracing for punishment. Thomas took a step closer and she flinched. He raised a hand, hesitant this time, not commanding. "What's your name?" No answer. Just wide eyes watching every movement he made. He crouched down, his expensive trousers brushing the grime of the alley floor. "I'm not going to hurt you. But you took something that isn't yours." His tone was firm, but the sharpness had softened. Her gaze flicked to the ground. I give it back," she whispered, her accent faint but musical. "Please, mister, I give it back." Her small hand shook as she held out the wallet. The tears on her cheeks carved pale lines through the dust on her skin. Thomas didn't take it right away. He just watched her. 5 years old, maybe. No shoes, her feet scraped and bleeding at the edges. The yellow dress she wore was torn along the hem, clinging to her like a second skin. She looked too small for the world around her, too fragile for the heat, the noise, the hard angles of the city. He finally reached out, gently taking the wallet from her hand. "Why?" he asked quietly. She hesitated, biting her lip. "Mommy's hungry," she said, almost inaudible. "Mommy's sick. I just want buy food. And medicine." Thomas blinked, unsure if he'd heard right. "You stole to buy medicine?" Her head bobbed in a quick, desperate nod. "Yes, sir. I sorry. Something twisted deep in his chest, something that didn't feel like anger anymore. It felt like shame. He stood, looking around at the alley he'd chased her into. For the first time, he noticed what he'd ignored on his way in. The graffiti scrawled over crumbling brick, the broken bottles glittering like cheap jewels in the sunlight, the sour smell of trash baking in the heat. This wasn't the Los Angeles of rooftop lounges and board meetings. This was the city that lived beneath his shoes, the one he pretended not to see. Thomas ran a hand over his face, trying to steady himself. "Where's your mother?" The girl's eyes darted toward the far end of the alley, then back to him. She didn't answer. He sighed. "Look, I'm not going to call the police. But you need to take me to her. If she's really sick, she needs help." Her face changed instantly, fear flashing through her eyes like lightning. She took a small step back, clutching her hands together. "No police. Please, no police. They take Mommy away." "No one's taking anyone away," he said, trying to sound calm, though his voice carried an edge of frustration. "Just show me where she is." The little girl stared at him for a long moment. The city buzzed behind them. Distant sirens, honking cars, the rhythm of lives that didn't care about this forgotten alley. Finally, she whispered, "You promise?" Thomas hesitated, then nodded. "I promise." They began walking. The contrast was jarring. Just minutes ago, Thomas had been standing in front of the gleaming marble of his skyscraper, surrounded by glass, order, and power. Now he was following a barefoot child through narrow streets that smelled of rust and decay. Amanda, he would learn her name soon, moved cautiously, her small body weaving through the maze of alleys with the practiced instinct of someone who had learned to survive invisibility. He followed close behind, the noise of his polished shoes sounding almost wrong against the uneven pavement. "Where are we going?" he asked. "To Mommy," she said softly. "What's your name?" She hesitated, glancing up at him. "Amanda." He nodded slowly. "Amanda. That's a pretty name." She didn't answer. The silence stretched between them, filled with the sounds of the city, the buzz of a broken streetlight, the flutter of pigeons overhead, the hum of a distant train. As they turned another corner, the neighborhoods changed. The buildings grew older, paint peeling from the walls. Windows were boarded, doors reinforced with mismatched locks. The scent of garbage mixed with fried food drifted from somewhere nearby. Amanda's small figure led him through a side street crowded with overflowing dumpsters and sagging laundry lines. "Do you live here?" Thomas asked. She nodded. "We live close." "How long have you been here?" Her small brow furrowed, as though she were trying to measure time with memories. "A long time." He studied her as they walked, the way her shoulders hunched as if expecting scolding, the way she avoided people's eyes. Every instinct in him screamed that she didn't belong here. But then again, neither did he. They reached a small complex tucked between two warehouses, a structure that looked half abandoned, its plaster cracked, paint fading into gray. A single broken sign hung loosely by a nail, swaying with the wind. Amanda pointed toward the staircase. "Up there." Thomas hesitated. He could turn back now, call someone, his assistant, security, anyone, and have this problem handled at a distance. That's how he lived. That's how he kept his world clean. But something about the way Amanda's voice broke on the word Mommy made turning back impossible. The climb was steep, the metal railing warm under his hand. Amanda moved quickly despite her bare feet, skipping the steps she knew were too rusted to trust. She stopped at a door on the third floor, its number long faded, replaced by a strip of masking tape and a child's scribble, 3B. She turned the knob. It creaked open. The smell hit first: mold, damp wood, sickness. The air inside was heavy, still. The room was small, dimly lit by a single window with half a curtain. A fan in the corner turned slowly, stirring the heat without easing it. The furniture was mismatched. A sagging couch, a small table covered with empty bottles and medicine wrappers. And on the mattress against the wall lay a woman. She couldn't have been more than 30, but her skin was ashen, her lips pale. Her dark hair stuck to her forehead in damp strands. She turned her head slightly at the sound of their footsteps, eyes struggling to focus. "Amanda!" The voice was weak, raspy. "Mommy!" The girl ran forward, dropping to her knees beside the bed. She took the woman's hand, holding it tight. "I come back. I bring something." The woman tried to sit up, coughing hard, her body shaking with the effort. Thomas instinctively stepped forward, catching her shoulder before she could fall back. Her eyes flicked toward him, confusion clouding her expression. Who are you?" Thomas opened his mouth but hesitated. How did he explain this? That he'd chased her daughter through the streets over a stolen wallet? That his morning of meetings and schedules had led him here, into a room where survival was measured in stolen moments and scraps of bread? He stopped, then said quietly, "I'm someone who wants to help." Mara's gaze softened for a moment before she turned back to Amanda. "You didn't steal again, did you?" Amanda froze. "No, Mommy," she said quickly, shaking her head. "I only want to buy food. You need medicine." Mara's eyes closed briefly, a sigh slipping through her lips. "You shouldn't have done that, baby." Thomas stood there, the weight of the scene pressing down on him. He glanced around the room again, at the empty cupboards, the broken fan, the makeshift curtain. The refrigerator door hung slightly open. Inside, there was nothing but a bottle of water and an old jar of peanut butter. Every assumption he'd carried about control, about earning what you deserved, about people choosing their situation, crumbled silently inside him. He'd built towers out of money, but this was life stripped bare. Amanda looked up at him again, her eyes glassy but hopeful. "You help Mommy?" Thomas swallowed hard. He didn't know what he was agreeing to, only that the word left his mouth before he could think. "Yes," he said quietly. "I'll help." Outside, the city kept moving. Cars rushing, people hustling, deals being made. But inside that small apartment, time slowed. He didn't know it yet, but this was the first real decision he'd made in years that had nothing to do with profit or power. He glanced down at his wallet in his hand, the symbol of everything he'd spent his life chasing, and for the first time, it felt meaningless. The building looked abandoned. Its cracked facade rose like a wounded skeleton against the bruised Los Angeles sky, graffiti bleeding across its walls in a dozen colors that once meant rebellion but now just looked like exhaustion. The iron gate screeched as Amanda pushed it open. "Upstairs," she whispered, pointing toward a narrow stairwell. Thomas followed, his polished shoes sinking into grime that clung to every step. The air smelled of rust, mildew, and something metallic. The fluorescent light overhead flickered, buzzing, dying, reviving again as if reluctant to keep shining. He'd been in old buildings before, industrial properties his company had bought, gutted, and remade into glass offices, but never one that felt alive in its decay. Here, everything seemed to breathe slowly, the walls, the dust, the silence. Amanda's bare feet made no sound. Her small hands skimmed the railing, careful, practiced. "Don't step there," she said softly, pointing to a loose stair. "It break." Thomas nodded wordlessly. He was too stunned to speak. When they reached the third floor, she led him down a hallway lined with peeling paint and doors that looked as though they'd been forced open one too many times. Faint music drifted from one unit, a radio playing a static-filled love song. Somewhere, a baby cried. Amanda stopped at the far end and turned the knob of apartment 3B. It didn't lock properly, the wood had splintered near the hinge. "Come," she whispered, motioning him inside. The smell hit him first. Damp, unwashed air clinging to the walls, mingled with the faint sweetness of cough syrup. The apartment was small, 2 rooms and a corner kitchen. What little furniture existed was mismatched. A wooden chair missing a leg, a table covered in old envelopes, a second-hand fan struggling against the heat. He had expected mess, but not this kind of silence. Not this stillness that felt like surrender. A weak cough came from the back room. Amanda dropped her small bag near the door and ran ahead. "Mommy, I come back." Thomas followed quietly. His eyes adjusted to the dim light, and there she was, Mara. She lay on a worn mattress on the floor, her skin slick with sweat, her body trembling under a thin blanket. Her breathing was shallow, each inhale labored and uneven. She looked barely conscious, her lips dry, her hands shaking as she reached weakly toward her daughter. "Mommy," Amanda whispered, kneeling beside her. "I'm here. I bring someone." Thomas stood frozen in the doorway, unsure whether to move or speak. He had seen illness before, in hospitals his company funded, in clinical reports, but not like this. Not up close. This was the kind of sickness that didn't just take the body, it hollowed out the air around it. Mara's eyes fluttered open. For a moment, confusion clouded them. Then she blinked at him, her voice a faint rasp. "You from housing?" Thomas blinked. "What?" "From the building office," she murmured weakly, mistaking his suit for authority. I have rent next week. Please, don't turn off the light again." The assumption hit him like a stone. He wanted to say something, anything, but the words wouldn't come. Amanda clutched her mother's hand. "He not bad, Mommy. He help us." Mara smiled faintly, her expression both grateful and weary. "You a kind man, then?" Thomas swallowed hard. He'd been called many things in his life, brilliant, ruthless, strategic, but kind was not one of them. He stepped forward, kneeling beside the mattress. "How long has she been like this?" Amanda shrugged, eyes wide. "She sleep a lot. Sometimes she wake, sometimes not. She coughs all night." Thomas reached for his phone instinctively, opening his contact list before hesitating. "Why didn't you take her to a hospital?" Amanda shook her head. "They say no paper, no help." That simple sentence cut through him more deeply than any insult ever could. No paper, no help. He looked around the room again, taking in the full picture. A chipped glass of water sat beside Mara's bed, half empty. A bottle of cheap cough syrup. An unopened envelope from the utility company lay near the door, stamped final notice. He walked to the kitchenette. The refrigerator hummed faintly, its doors sealed with tape. He peeled it open. Inside, there was half a loaf of stale bread, a bruised apple, and nothing else. His throat tightened. "Is this all you've eaten?" Amanda nodded. "We share." He stared at the bread. The man who had dined in Michelin-star restaurants, who ordered meals that cost more than most people's rent, suddenly couldn't look at food the same way. When he turned back, Amanda was watching him, uncertain. "You mad at me?" she asked. He shook his head. "No," his voice was quiet, almost a whisper. "Not at all." Her eyes flicked toward the wallet still in his hand. "You can take it back. I only want to buy milk." He took a deep breath, forcing himself to stay steady. "Amanda, listen to me." He knelt so he was eye level with her. "You did something wrong, yes, but you did it for the right reason. You were trying to help your mother." She stared at him, unsure if she was being forgiven or scolded. "You not tell police?" "No," he said firmly. "No police." Something inside him was shifting. Slowly, quietly, like a fault line beneath the surface. He glanced at Mara again. Her breathing rattled in the dim air, shallow and uneven. She was fading. He didn't know her story, where she came from, what she had lost, but he knew that without help, she wouldn't last another day. Thomas stood, pacing once around the room. Every instinct from his professional life screamed that he should walk away, delegate this to someone else, fix it from afar. That was what he did. He fixed problems with distance and money. But he couldn't move. Not yet. He turned back to Amanda. "How old are you?" 5. "Do you have family here? Anyone who can help?" She shook her head. "Just Mommy." Your father? Her voice dropped. He gone. Long time. Thomas looked at Mara again. Her lips trembled as she whispered something in her sleep, words he couldn't understand but that sounded like prayer. He realized then that this wasn't just poverty. It was isolation. They were invisible. And somehow that felt like his fault. He moved to the small window. Outside, the street glimmered with heat and distance. Somewhere down there, people like him were getting coffee, sending emails, making deals, unaware of this little apartment and the life flickering out inside it. He thought of his own tower, the glass walls, the scent of polished marble, the endless hum of air conditioning. For years, he had believed he was at the top of the world. Now he wasn't so sure there was a top. The sound of coughing pulled him back. Mara's body shook violently, and Amanda scrambled to steady her. Thomas rushed forward, kneeling beside them. "Mommy, stop," Amanda cried softly, patting her mother's chest. "Please stop." Thomas looked at her labored breathing, the way her chest struggled for each inhale, the blue tint forming around her lips. He didn't need a doctor to tell him. This was serious. He rose to his feet and pulled out his phone again, this time with purpose. His fingers hovered over the screen. Should he call an ambulance? Would they even come? He thought of Amanda's words. No paper, no help. Mr. Thomas? Amanda's voice was small, uncertain. He glanced at her. Yes. She looked frightened again. You call police? He shook his head. No. I'm calling someone who can help your mom. Her eyes filled with tears of relief. You promise? I promise. He dialed 911. His voice came out clear, commanding, reflexively businesslike, but there was a tremor in it he didn't recognize. This is Thomas Livingstone, he said. I need an ambulance at 1628 East Wilshire Avenue, apartment 3B. Female patient, mid-30s, severe respiratory distress. Possible pneumonia. The operator asked a few questions. He answered quickly, precise as ever. When he hung up, Amanda was staring at him like he'd performed a miracle. They coming? Yes, he said softly. They're coming. Minutes stretched like hours. Thomas knelt beside Mara, checking her pulse, wiping sweat from her forehead with his handkerchief. She stirred slightly, her eyes opening halfway. Who are you? She whispered again. He hesitated. Someone who shouldn't have waited this long to notice you. She tried to smile, but the effort was too much. Her eyes fluttered shut again. Amanda's tiny hand gripped his sleeve. You make her better? Thomas swallowed hard. I'll try. The sirens arrived faintly at first, growing louder as they approached the building. Relief washed over him, until he remembered what Amanda had said earlier. No police. He moved quickly to the door, stepping into the hallway as two EMTs climbed the stairs, their heavy boots echoing off the concrete. Apartment 3B? One asked. Yes, Thomas said. She's inside. She's very sick. They brushed past him, carrying their gear. One of them muttered under his breath, another one of these buildings. He followed them back into the apartment, but as soon as they began checking Mara's vitals, one EMT hesitated. She's undocumented, isn't she? The man said quietly. You sure you want to take responsibility for this, sir? Could be complications with billing, reporting. Thomas cut him off sharply. Bill it to me. My name is Thomas Livingstone. The EMT blinked. The Thomas Livingstone? Yes, Thomas snapped. Now stop wasting time. The man nodded quickly and motioned for his partner to lift Mara onto the stretcher. As they carried her out, Amanda clung to Thomas's arm. Can I go too? She asked, voice shaking. He looked down at her, at those wide brown eyes shimmering with fear. Of course, he said gently. You're coming with me. The EMTs maneuvered the stretcher down the narrow stairwell. Thomas followed, Amanda's small hand gripping his tightly. Outside, the ambulance door swung open, and the city's noise crashed back into his world. Horns, shouting, heat. He helped them load Mara inside, then turned to Amanda. "Stay close," he said quietly. "Don't let go." She nodded, her small fingers still locked around his. For the first time in his life, Thomas Livingstone, the man who owned towers, who controlled markets, felt something entirely new. Not power, not pride. Responsibility. He looked at the girl beside him, her face streaked with tears and dust, and made a decision that surprised even himself. "I'll get help," he whispered. "Whatever it takes." And for the first time that day, he meant every word. The ambulance screamed through downtown, slicing through traffic like a silver blade. Inside, the air was thick with antiseptic and panic. Amanda huddled beside Thomas, her small hand gripping his sleeve as if letting go would make the world disappear. Mara lay motionless on the stretcher, the rhythmic beep of the heart monitor cutting through the tension. One EMT pressed an oxygen mask against her face, while the other filled out paperwork on a clipboard, his pen scratching against the surface like static. Thomas sat rigid, his jaw locked, eyes fixed on Mara. He had seen crises before, market crashes, boardroom collapses, political scandals, but never anything like this. This wasn't numbers or strategies. This was life, fragile and fading. "Her pulse is weak," one EMT muttered. "BP dropping." "Then drive faster," Thomas snapped. The driver didn't respond. The siren wailed louder, bouncing off the glass towers that lined the street. His towers, his empire. The irony burned. When they reached the emergency bay, the paramedics burst through the doors, pushing Mara's stretcher ahead. Thomas followed close behind, carrying Amanda in his arms. She clung to him tightly, her face buried in his shoulder. Inside the hospital, the fluorescent lights were harsh, the air cold and clinical. Nurses moved briskly, their faces unreadable behind masks. "This way," one EMT said, guiding the stretcher toward a curtained-off area. "Respiratory distress, low oxygen, possible pneumonia." "Does she have identification?" a nurse asked, already typing into a computer. Thomas glanced at Amanda, then at Mara's trembling hands. "No. She's undocumented." The nurse froze. Her expression tightened just slightly, barely noticeable, but there. "Then we'll need clearance before admitting her." "Clearance?" Thomas repeated, his voice hardening. "She's dying." "I understand, sir," the nurse said politely, eyes flicking to the paramedics. "But without ID, we can't process her under state coverage. If we admit her under emergency care, it needs authorization, either financial or federal." Thomas stared at her, the words sinking in like ice. "You're saying you can't treat her because she doesn't have paperwork?" The nurse didn't meet his eyes. "It's hospital policy." For a moment, he couldn't speak. Behind him, Amanda's voice trembled. "They not help Mommy?" Thomas crouched slightly so she could see his face. "They will," he said quietly, though his stomach knotted with doubt. "I promise." He turned back to the staff. "What about emergency care? Surely you have protocols for this." One of the EMTs shifted uncomfortably, leaning closer to whisper, "Sir, if we log this call under an undocumented patient, it'll trigger a report to immigration. It's policy." Thomas blinked, disbelief flashing across his face. "You're telling me you'll call immigration before you call a doctor?" The EMT looked away. "It's not my rule, sir. It's the system." Thomas straightened, his eyes narrowing. The old edge in his voice returned, not anger, but authority, the kind that used to close billion-dollar deals and make senators return calls. "Then change the system," he said. Now. Silence fell. The nurse hesitated. The EMT avoided his gaze. Bureaucracy, invisible but immovable, hung in the air like smog. For Thomas, something cracked. He had spent his life believing that money could buy solutions, that systems were simply tools waiting for the right operator. But here, standing under the sterile glow of hospital lights, surrounded by rules that valued documents over people, he felt powerless for the first time. His jaw clenched. "Bill it to me," he said finally. "My name is Thomas Livingstone." The nurse's hands froze on the keyboard. She turned, her expression shifting from weary to wary. "The Thomas Livingstone?" "Yes," he said flatly. "Now admit her." The EMTs exchanged quick glances. Within seconds, the nurse picked up the phone, murmuring orders into the receiver. The motion resumed, machines wheeled in, gloves snapped on, a doctor rushing toward them. Mara disappeared behind a curtain of white, swallowed by the machinery of care that had almost refused her. Thomas stood there for a moment, the adrenaline draining from his body. Amanda's hand tugged at his sleeve. "You save her?" He knelt again, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "We're going to try, okay? They're helping her now." She nodded, but her small face twisted with worry. "No one ever helped before." His heart squeezed. "Well," he said softly, "someone should have." They were led to a waiting area. The hum of the hospital surrounded them, monitors beeping, shoes squeaking against tile, murmured conversations behind glass walls. A television mounted on the far wall played muted news coverage about the stock market, ironically, about his company. He turned away. Amanda sat beside him, small and silent, swinging her feet above the floor. She looked out of place amid the steel chairs and antiseptic light. A nurse passed by holding a tray of files and gave the girl a brief, puzzled glance. Thomas leaned forward, elbows on his knees. He could still see Mara's face in his mind, the pale skin, the trembling lips, the sound of her breathing as she fought for air. He pulled out his phone, typing rapidly. Contacts, assistants, board members, names that usually represented power and access. Now they felt hollow. He called his head of operations first. "Thomas?" came the surprised voice on the other end. "You're calling at this hour?" "I need authorization for a private transfer," Thomas said sharply. "St. Joseph's Medical Center. Respiratory unit. Full coverage under my name." "Of course, sir." "For whom?" "For a patient named Mara Bennett," he said. Then he paused, realizing he didn't even know her last name. "Wait, forget that. Just file it under my name. Total discretion." "Understood, sir." Thomas hung up, exhaling deeply. The weight in his chest didn't ease. Half an hour passed. Then another. No one came out to update them. Amanda had stopped asking questions, her small body curling against the chair. Every few minutes, she glanced at the hallway Mara had vanished into. When a nurse finally appeared, Thomas rose instantly. "How is she?" The woman hesitated. "Stable for now, but critical. Severe pneumonia. Her oxygen levels are dangerously low. She'll need to be admitted to the ICU." "Then admit her," he said. "We're processing her paperwork," she replied carefully. "It's complicated." His voice sharpened. "Complicated? I just told you I'd cover everything." "It's not just about billing, Mr. Livingstone. There are reporting protocols, identification requirements. We need to know who she is before you save her life," he snapped. The nurse flinched slightly, lowering her gaze. "We're doing our best." Thomas stared at her, feeling the weight of every rule, every excuse, every delay pressing against him. He had spent decades navigating bureaucracy, bending it to his will. But this was something different. This wasn't about control. This was about indifference disguised as order. He paced the waiting area, phone in hand, making calls, to the hospital board, to a friend on the city council, to a private medical director he knew through charity work. Each call met with the same polite hesitation, the same underlying question. Why her? He didn't have an answer. When he finally sat down again, exhaustion settled over him. Amanda had fallen asleep beside him, her head resting against his arm. Her small hands still clutched the hem of his jacket, as if afraid he might disappear. He looked down at her, this tiny stranger who had crashed into his life and dismantled everything he thought he knew about fairness. Her breathing was soft, steady. He envied it. Across the room, a janitor pushed a mop, humming quietly. The television droned on about stock gains, mergers, forecasts. His world carried on without him. He wondered how many people like Mara passed through these doors every day, caught between policies and indifference. How many lives were decided by forms, signatures, or the wrong kind of name? He leaned his head back against the wall, closing his eyes. The antiseptic scent of the hospital mixed with something else, something human. Fatigue. Compassion. For the first time in his life, Thomas Livingstone wasn't the one people obeyed. He was just another man waiting for mercy from a system that had none. A soft voice interrupted his thoughts. Mr. Livingstone? He opened his eyes. A nurse stood before him, clipboard in hand. She's been transferred to the ICU, she said gently. They're starting her on oxygen and antibiotics. We'll know more in a few hours. Relief washed through him, heavy and fragile. Thank you, he murmured. The nurse smiled faintly. She's lucky to have someone like you. Thomas looked down at Amanda, still sleeping, her head resting against his arm. No, he said quietly. I'm the lucky one. He sat there long after the nurse left, watching the lights flicker above him. Around him, the world kept moving. Doctors calling codes, patients being wheeled past, machines humming their mechanical songs. Amanda stirred, her small fingers tightening around his sleeve. She okay? She whispered, half awake. Thomas smoothed her curls gently. They're taking care of her now. She's going to be okay. Amanda smiled faintly, her eyelids fluttering shut again. And as she drifted back to sleep, her head nestled against his arm, Thomas felt something strange and foreign settle in his chest. Peace, maybe, or the first faint flicker of redemption. For once, his wealth had done something real. Something human. The hours crawled by under the sterile hum of hospital lights. Thomas hadn't moved from the waiting room. Amanda lay curled up beside him on the couch, her head resting against his side, still asleep. The faint rhythm of her breathing was the only thing grounding him. He'd sent emails, made calls, and personally arranged for Mara's transfer into the ICU. His phone sat silent now, the screen dimmed, his empire momentarily irrelevant. The only updates that mattered were the ones from behind that heavy door labeled intensive care. The city outside had darkened, but the hospital never slept. Nurses drifted through hallways like ghosts, monitors blinked in steady patterns. Somewhere down the corridor, a child cried. Thomas leaned back, exhaustion seeping into his bones. For a fleeting moment, the noise around him faded. He almost dozed, until the sound of footsteps shattered the quiet. 2 uniformed officers entered the waiting room. Their badges gleamed under the fluorescent light. One was tall, clean-cut, maybe in his 30s. The other, older, had a mustache and the tired look of a man who had seen too much of the city. The taller one spoke first. Thomas Livingstone? Thomas sat up immediately. That's me. The officer nodded. We received an incident report this morning. Wallet reported stolen by an unidentified minor. We traced the call to your number. Thomas blinked. He'd forgotten. The call he'd made before chasing Amanda, the automatic report logged in the city system. The officer's gaze moved past him and landed on the small girl sleeping beside him. That her? Thomas's body tensed. What do you mean? The older officer stepped forward, lowering his voice. Sir, we need to speak with the child. She's 5, Thomas said flatly. The younger one exchanged a look with his partner. Doesn't matter. We just need to verify the incident. We've got procedures. Procedures. Thomas cut him off, his tone slicing through the air. You're telling me you came here to interrogate a 5-year-old in a hospital waiting room? The officer hesitated. Sir, we don't make the rules. We just follow up. She was seen fleeing a crime scene. We have to file a statement. Thomas's anger ignited. A crime scene? You're talking about a child trying to buy food for her sick mother. The older cop sighed. With respect, Mr. Livingstone, that's not how the law works. Thomas stood up, his full height and authority filling the room. Then maybe the law needs to work differently. Amanda stirred at the sound of raised voices. Her small head lifted, eyes groggy with sleep. Mr. Thomas? She murmured. He crouched beside her quickly, forcing his tone gentle. It's okay, Amanda. Everything's fine. Her gaze flicked to the officers. The moment she saw their uniforms, she stiffened. Her hands clutched the edge of his sleeve. The younger officer spoke again, softer this time. Ma'am. He caught himself. Sweetheart, we just need to ask you a few questions. Amanda's lip trembled. Did I do bad? Thomas's chest tightened. No, he said firmly. You didn't. The officer took a hesitant step forward, pulling out a notepad. We just need your name, that's all. Thomas moved in front of her, blocking their path. You're not questioning her. Not without me. The older cop frowned. Sir, please don't make this difficult. I'm already past difficult, Thomas said. His voice dropped to a cold, dangerous calm. You're standing in a hospital trying to detain a starving child who stole my wallet to buy medicine. Does that sound like justice to you? Neither officer replied. The younger one exhaled, adjusting his radio. Sir, I understand your concern. But protocol requires. Thomas snapped. Protocol? You're arresting a 5-year-old for trying to eat. His voice echoed down the corridor, sharp enough to make a nurse stop in her tracks. The officers exchanged another uneasy glance. One reached for his radio again, perhaps to call in or calm things down, but Thomas stepped closer. She's under my care, he said, his tone unyielding. You'll have to arrest me first. For a moment, the room froze. Even the monitors seemed to quiet. The officers looked at each other, then at the man standing before them, the billionaire whose name was printed on half the city's skyscrapers. Neither moved. Finally, the older one sighed. Look, we don't want trouble, Mr. Livingstone. We'll file it as a misunderstanding. Thomas's glare didn't waver. But, because that's exactly what it was. The tension broke when a nurse hurried over. Officers, please, she said gently, this is a restricted area. The child's mother is in ICU. If you have questions, you'll need to coordinate with administration. The younger cop nodded quickly, eager for an exit. Understood. Sorry for the disturbance. They turned to leave. But before they did, the older officer paused, his eyes meeting Thomas's. You're doing the right thing, sir. Just be careful. Systems don't like being bent. Thomas said nothing. He just watched them go. When the doors closed behind them, the waiting room exhaled. Amanda looked up at him with wide eyes. They gone? Yes, Thomas said softly. They're gone. She hesitated, still clutching his sleeve. They take bad people. He knelt beside her again. You're not bad, Amanda. She frowned. Mommy say stealing wrong. He sighed. Sometimes people do the wrong things for the right reasons. After a while, she seemed to relax. A nurse brought her a cup of warm milk, and she sipped it quietly. Her small hand still shook, though less now. Thomas watched her in silence, his anger still simmering, but it wasn't directed at the officers anymore. It was aimed at something bigger, invisible, cruel. The system. It had rules for everything except compassion. He leaned back in his chair, rubbing the bridge of his nose. You shouldn't have to be afraid of them, he muttered, mostly to himself. Amanda looked up. They took Daddy once. Thomas froze. His hand dropped. What? She swallowed hard. A long time ago. Before Mommy got sick. He turned toward her fully. Where did they take him? Her little shoulders lifted. I don't know. He went to work one morning and didn't come back. Mommy say the place break. He fall. People come. They say sorry. Thomas's pulse quickened. What kind of work did he do? Build tall buildings, she said simply. Big ones. Mommy say he make the city stand. A strange chill crawled through him. Do you remember the name of the company? Amanda squinted, thinking hard. It start with an L. Mommy cry when she see it on the news. Thomas's heart dropped. Livingstone Construction. The name came out barely above a whisper. He didn't need to ask again. He remembered. It had been 3 years ago. A scaffolding collapse on one of his downtown projects, 3 workers dead, several injured. A negligence settlement handled quietly by his legal team. He hadn't even attended the hearing. The details had been a footnote in his schedule, a problem solved by signatures and lawyers. But now, the human face of that footnote was sitting beside him, holding an empty cup in small, trembling hands. Amanda. Her father had died building one of his towers. He couldn't breathe for a moment. Guilt hit him like a wave, heavy, suffocating. He saw flashes of boardroom meetings, spreadsheets, quarterly reports, all the ways he'd turned lives into numbers. And then he saw her, tiny, barefoot, 5 years old, surviving on scraps in the city her father helped raise. He leaned forward, elbows on his knees, trying to steady the storm in his chest. Amanda looked up at him, curious. You okay, Mr. Thomas? He forced a nod. Yeah, he whispered. Yeah, I'm fine. But he wasn't. Not even close. The hours bled together. Hospital staff came and went, giving updates in quiet tones. Mara remained critical but stable for now. Amanda eventually grew tired and curled up again beside him on the couch. He watched her sleep, small and peaceful, the faintest smile tugging at her lips as if dreaming of something better. The same hands that once built empires rested now, gently brushing hair from her forehead. He thought of her father, the man whose name he never learned. A worker who died forgotten. A casualty of a world Thomas had helped create. His empire had stolen enough. He would not let it take this child too. Outside, dawn began to break, a pale light cutting through the hospital blinds. The world was waking up again, phones ringing, cars starting, deals being made. Thomas Livingstone sat perfectly still, the sound of Amanda's soft breathing the only rhythm he cared about. Somewhere deep inside him, the walls began to crack. Not the walls of buildings, but the ones around his heart. For the first time, he understood what it meant to have everything, and still be poor in the ways that mattered most. He looked down at Amanda, sleeping peacefully against his arm, and whispered, "I'll fix this. I swear I'll fix this." But as he said it, he realized, this wasn't a promise to her. It was a promise to himself. The ICU smelled like cold air and antiseptic. Machines hummed in low, mechanical rhythms, punctuated by the steady pulse of a monitor. Thomas stood just inside the doorway, his hands buried in his coat pockets, staring at the woman on the bed. Mara looked smaller now, Her skin was pale and tight around her cheekbones, her breathing shallow and uneven. Wires trailed from her body like vines, connecting her to the fragile promise of survival. A nurse adjusted the oxygen mask over her face, murmuring something about oxygen levels, but Thomas barely heard. Amanda sat on a chair beside the bed, her feet swinging above the tile floor. She was drawing something with a broken blue crayon on the back of a hospital form, her version of holding on. Every few seconds, she looked up at her mother, as if willing her to wake up. The doctor entered quietly, clipboard in hand. Dr. Patel was young but exhausted, her dark eyes weary with the kind of fatigue that came from fighting systems, not just sickness. "Mr. Livingstone," she began softly, "we've done everything we can with the antibiotics, but the infection's spreading fast. Her lungs are failing." Thomas straightened. "Then give her something stronger." Patel hesitated. "There's an experimental drug, still in international trials. It's shown promise in Europe, but it hasn't been cleared by the FDA here. It could save her life, but the risks are significant." "Risks?" Thomas asked. "She could go into cardiac arrest during the infusion," Patel said carefully. "Or her organs might not respond at all. There's no guaranteed outcome." Amanda's small voice broke the silence. "Will it make Mommy better?" Patel crouched beside her, gentler now. "We hope so, sweetheart. We really hope so." Thomas ran a hand through his hair, pacing. "How long would it take to get the drug?" Patel hesitated again. "Under normal circumstances? Weeks. Paperwork, customs, approvals." He cut her off. "Not if I handle it." Her brows lifted. "You can't just—" "I can," he said, pulling his phone from his pocket. "And I will." There was something in his voice, a sharpness born not of arrogance, but desperation. He stepped into the hall, scrolling through contacts. Years of boardroom power, political favors, and corporate leverage were finally being used for something that mattered. He called a pharmaceutical CEO he'd once cornered in a merger meeting, another he'd backed in an investment deal. Within an hour, a plan was in motion, a private courier flight from Switzerland carrying the trial drug under compassionate emergency use. Money moved faster than mercy. Back in the waiting room, Thomas sat beside Amanda as she colored on another hospital form. "What are you drawing this time?" he asked. She smiled faintly. "Mommy and me, and you." He paused. "Me?" "Uh-huh." She looked up, her expression serious. "'Cause you helped us." Mommy say when people help, they become part of the story. Thomas swallowed hard, staring at the drawing. A shaky trio holding hands under a crooked sun. "That's a good story," he said quietly. Amanda nodded. "I want it to have a happy ending." He forced a smile. "So do I." Hours later, Patel returned with paperwork. "The courier's en route. If you're sure about this, you'll need to sign authorization as her proxy. There's a clause. If something goes wrong, you'll assume full liability." Thomas blinked. "Liability? She doesn't have insurance." "Exactly," Patel said. "You're stepping into legal and ethical territory most people avoid. If she dies, the media, the board, the FD, someone will want someone to blame." He exhaled slowly. "I've been blamed before. For less noble reasons." "Mr. Livingstone," she said gently, "this isn't a corporate risk. It's a human one." He looked through the glass at Amanda, who was sitting cross-legged on the floor, tracing the outline of her crayon sun. Her small shoulders rose and fell in quiet rhythm. He took the pen. "I'll sign." By evening, the courier had arrived. A small metal case stamped with medical insignia was placed on Patel's desk. The vials inside shimmered faintly under the light, like something sacred. Thomas stood at the ICU window as they prepared the infusion. Amanda clung to his hand, her other arm wrapped around her stuffed bear. "She looks sleepy," Amanda whispered. "She's resting," Thomas said, though the words felt hollow. Patel entered the room with her team, their movements swift and deliberate. Machines beeped in readiness. Thomas felt his pulse quicken as they connected the 4-line. He glanced at the clock. 10:47 p.m. The doctor's voice came over the intercom. "Starting infusion." At first, everything seemed calm. The monitor's steady rhythm continued. Mara's chest rose and fell in shallow, mechanical breaths. Then, without warning, the line spiked. The monitor screamed a shrill alarm. "Heart rate dropping," a nurse shouted. Thomas froze. "What's happening?" Patel's voice turned urgent. "She's in cardiac arrest. Get the crash cart." Amanda screamed. "Mommy!" Thomas's heart pounded against his ribs. Nurses swarmed the bed, moving with precision and panic. Patel pressed the defibrillator paddles against Mara's chest. "Clear." Her body jolted. The monitor flatlined. Again, "Clear." Nothing. The sound of the flatline filled the corridor, a single, endless tone that tore through the sterile quiet. Amanda's cries became a sharp, shattering echo. Thomas reached for her, holding her close, his own voice trembling. "She's fighting, sweetheart. She's fighting." Patel's voice, strained but steady, "One more time." "Clear." The third shock sent a tremor through the room, then a pause. The monitor flickered. A heartbeat. Faint, fragile, but there. Patel exhaled, voice breaking. "We've got a pulse." Thomas closed his eyes, the sound washing over him like redemption. Amanda buried her face against his chest, sobbing. "She's coming back," he whispered. "She's coming back to you." Minutes blurred into an hour. The chaos subsided, replaced by the steady, rhythmic beeping of the monitor, the most beautiful sound Thomas had ever heard. Patel stepped out of the ICU, mask pulled down, her face damp with sweat. "She's stable," she said. "It'll take time, but she's holding on." Thomas nodded, unable to speak. Amanda rushed to the glass, pressing her palms against it, whispering, "You did it, Mommy." Patel turned to Thomas. "You should get some rest. You look like you've been through a war." He managed a tired smile. "Maybe I have." When the hallway emptied, he sank into the nearest chair, exhaustion hitting all at once. Amanda climbed onto his lap, still clutching her bear. "She's gonna be okay, right?" she asked softly. He looked toward the ICU window where Mara lay, her chest rising and falling in rhythm with the heart monitor. "Yes," he said quietly. "She's going to be okay." Amanda rested her head against him, her tiny hand gripping his sleeve. "Thank you," she whispered. Thomas blinked back tears. "You don't have to thank me." She smiled faintly. "Mommy say always thank people who help." He looked down at her, then at the door leading into the room where Mara fought for breath. "Then maybe," he said, voice low, "it's me who should be saying thank you." The hospital quieted as midnight approached. Outside the window, the city lights stretched endlessly, a constellation of lives Thomas had spent years viewing only from the top floor of a tower. But now, sitting in a hard plastic chair beside a sleeping child, he saw it differently. Every light was a story, a struggle, a heartbeat. Amanda stirred, her voice muffled against his chest. "Mr. Thomas?" "Yes." "Why you helping us?" He paused, caught off guard. Because I can." "That's not why," she mumbled sleepily. "You helping 'cause you care." He didn't answer, but deep down he knew she was right. The heart monitor from inside the ICU continued its gentle, steady rhythm. Beep, beep, beep. It echoed softly in his mind, an affirmation of life, of hope, of something awakening in him that had been silent for years. Thomas leaned his head back against the wall, eyes closing as exhaustion and relief blurred together. For the first time in decades, he didn't feel like the man who owned everything. He just felt human. And as that fragile, persistent heartbeat continued from the room beside him, he realized something profound. Sometimes, the edge of life is exactly where we rediscover our own. The days that followed were quieter. The chaos, the alarms, the frantic hours of waiting, all of it had faded into a fragile calm that felt almost unreal. Mara was alive. Barely, but alive. Her breathing steadied with each passing day, the machines around her gradually being silenced one by one. Thomas stood by the hospital window as morning light spilled through the blinds, casting long stripes across the floor. Amanda sat on the bed beside her mother, tiny fingers tangled around Mara's hand, unwilling to let go. Mara's eyes fluttered open every so often, her voice faint, but her grip, when it came, was surprisingly strong. "Mommy," Amanda whispered, leaning close. "You came back." Mara smiled weakly. "Couldn't leave you, little one." Thomas turned away, swallowing the lump in his throat. For the first time in years, the man who commanded boardrooms and built skylines had no words, only silence and gratitude. 2 days later, the peace broke in a different way. A nurse hurried in, a tablet in hand. "Mr. Livingstone," she said nervously, "you might want to see this." The screen showed a news article, "Billionaire Thomas Livingstone funds secret hospital miracle." His photo, grim, taken outside the hospital, was plastered across the headline. The story had leaked. Someone from the staff must have tipped the media. Within hours, more articles followed. Livingstone's redemption act? PR stunt or genuine compassion? Reporters camped outside the hospital, waiting for a statement. His phone lit up with calls, assistants, PR executives, members of his board. When he finally answered one, the voice on the other end was sharp. "Thomas, what the hell are you doing?" It was Richard Halloway, his CFO. "You've signed liability forms for an undocumented immigrant, pulled a trial drug illegally, and now the press is calling it a scandal. Do you realize the exposure we're facing?" Thomas's tone was calm, but cold. "Exposure to what? Compassion?" "This isn't about compassion, it's about optics. Investors are nervous. You can't just play savior because you felt something." Thomas's jaw clenched. "Maybe that's the problem, Richard. Maybe I've spent too long not feeling anything." There was silence. Then Richard sighed, exasperated. "You're risking everything for a stranger." Thomas glanced toward Mara's room, where Amanda sat feeding her mother spoonfuls of soup. "Then maybe it's worth the risk." He hung up. When Mara woke fully, Thomas was there. Her eyes flicked toward him, clear now, though tired. "You're the man who helped us," she said softly, her Jamaican accent lilting through each syllable. Thomas nodded. "You could say that." Her gaze wandered around the room. "You didn't have to." "I know," he replied. "But I wanted to." She hesitated, studying him. "Why?" He didn't have an answer. Or maybe he had too many. Guilt. Humanity. The face of a little girl who refused to give up. He simply said, "Because you deserve the chance to live." Mara gave a weak smile. "Chance. That's a word I haven't heard in a long time." 2 days later, she was discharged. The hospital didn't know where to send them. Mara's old apartment had been condemned during her stay. When the nurse asked for an address, Mara fell silent. Thomas didn't. "They'll stay with me," he said simply. Mara looked up sharply. "What?" "My estate has room," he said. "More than enough. You can recover properly. Amanda can have a Real bed, meals, doctors." She frowned. "We don't want saving, Mr. Livingstone." Thomas met her gaze, unflinching. I'm not trying to save you. Then what are you trying to do? He paused. Make things right. Her lips pressed into a thin line. We just need a chance, not charity. Then let me give you one, he said softly. The silence that followed wasn't resistance. It was exhaustion. Finally, Mara nodded once, her pride bending but not breaking. For Amanda, she whispered. The Livingstone estate sat on the edge of Beverly Hills, 40,000 square feet of glass, steel, and silence. It had always been immaculate, always still. But that night, as the black car pulled up the long driveway, Thomas felt something he hadn't in years: hesitation. He led them through the vast foyer, marble floors reflecting the golden chandelier light. Mara stopped just inside, clutching Amanda's hand. This place, she murmured, it don't even look real. Amanda's eyes were wide, drinking in the chandeliers and the staircase that spiraled like something from a fairy tale. Is this a hotel? Thomas smiled faintly. Something like that. That first night, Mara was given a guest suite overlooking the garden, and Amanda, her very own room. Thomas stood in the doorway, watching the little girl bounce on the bed like she was testing a dream. Is this mine? She asked. Yes, Thomas said. It's yours. She frowned thoughtfully. Just for tonight? He hesitated. For as long as you need. Amanda smiled, a bright, pure smile that lit up the sterile room. Thank you, Mr. Thomas. He nodded, his throat tight. Good night, Amanda. The days passed slowly, and something strange began to happen. The house, once filled with the hum of automated systems and quiet footsteps of staff, began to sound different. Amanda's laughter echoed down the halls. The smell of Mara's home-cooked food, simple, warm meals she insisted on making as her strength returned, replaced the sterile scent of catered dinners. Thomas found himself lingering in places he once ignored: the kitchen, the garden, the living room. He'd wake up to the faint sound of Jamaican lullabies drifting through the hall, or Amanda's giggles as she chased the housekeeper's cat down the corridor. The mansion no longer felt like a monument. It felt like a home. One evening, Thomas came home from a short meeting downtown. Amanda was sitting cross-legged on the living room rug, crayons spread everywhere. On the floor beside her was a piece of paper filled with bright shapes, a house with 3 figures in front. He crouched beside her. Who's that? He asked. She pointed. That's Mommy. That's me. Then she looked up at him and grinned. And that's you. He stared at the drawing. The little version of him wore a big smile, something he hadn't seen on his own face in years. You made me taller, he teased. You are tall, Amanda said seriously. Like a tree. Mara appeared in the doorway, leaning on the frame, a soft smile on her face. She draws everyone taller. Means she sees you as strong. Thomas looked up at her. Strong isn't the word I'd use. She tilted her head. Maybe not before. But you're trying. He couldn't help but smile. Trying's a start. Later that night, after Amanda had gone to bed, Thomas found himself standing outside Mara's room. The door was open a crack. She sat by the window, wrapped in a blanket, looking out over the city lights. They look so close, she said without turning. But they ain't, are they? He stepped inside. No, he said quietly. They never are. She turned to him then, her expression soft. I keep wondering why you really did all this. You could have walked away that first day. He hesitated, then answered honestly. Because I couldn't. Not after seeing her. Not after realizing how wrong I'd been about everything. She smiled faintly. You're learning something most people with power never do. What's that? That the heart don't run on profit, she said gently. And people don't need saving, they need seeing. He nodded slowly, the truth settling deep inside him. Then I'll keep looking. Weeks passed. Mara grew stronger, Amanda livelier. The house transformed around them. Less museum, more memory. For the first time in decades, Thomas didn't measure his worth in stock prices or contracts. He measured it in moments. Amanda's laughter echoing across marble, the soft sound of Mara humming in the kitchen, the quiet peace that came when the house lights dimmed at night. He had built towers that touched the sky, but none of them had ever reached this high. Because this was life. Not numbers. Not headlines. Just people, imperfect and alive. And in their presence, Thomas Livingstone, the man who once ruled from glass and steel, began to rediscover something far rarer than wealth, his own humanity. Morning light poured through the glass walls of the Livingstone estate, soft and golden, spilling across marble floors that now carried the faint echo of smaller footsteps. Amanda's laughter drifted from the hallway, light and unguarded, as she tugged her backpack onto her shoulders. "Mr. Thomas," she called, her curls bouncing as she ran into his study. "Miss Harper says I can bring my favorite toy for show and tell." Thomas looked up from his laptop, smiling. "And which toy is that?" Amanda proudly held up a small, worn teddy bear with a missing button eye. "This one. Mommy says he's lucky." He chuckled. "Then you'll have the best show and tell in all of Beverly Hills." Amanda giggled, hugged his leg, and dashed toward the front door where Mara waited, stronger now, dressed in a simple blouse and headscarf. Her face still carried traces of the fight she'd endured, but her eyes were alive again. "You sure she won't get lost in all that fancy?" Mara teased as Amanda waved goodbye to the driver waiting by the car. Thomas smiled. "She'll be fine. She's already more confident than half the people I work with." "Because she got heart," Mara said, her tone warm. "Not the kind you buy, the kind you keep." He nodded, quietly agreeing. "She got it from you." By the time Amanda's laughter faded down the driveway, silence settled again, gentler now, not the hollow kind he used to live in. Mara sat at the kitchen island, nursing a cup of tea. Her movements were slower than before, but deliberate, each gesture an act of recovery. "Doctor says I'll be walking fully soon," she said. "Just need to keep up with therapy." Thomas leaned against the counter. "Whatever you need, I'll make sure you have it." She gave him a look, half gratitude, half defiance. "You already done too much." "Maybe not enough," he said softly. Her eyes softened, but she didn't respond. The silence that followed wasn't awkward. It was the kind that came when two people had already said everything that mattered. That afternoon, he drove to the office for the first time in weeks. The headlines had cooled, but the whispers hadn't. Some saw him as a savior, others as a fool. When he stepped into the boardroom, the air was colder than he remembered. "Thomas," one of the directors began, "we're still dealing with the fallout. Investors are asking questions. They think your involvement has distracted you." He clasped his hands. "They're right. It did. But maybe that's what I needed." The man frowned. "You can't afford to appear emotional in business." Thomas gave a dry laugh. "You mean human?" Silence. A few uneasy glances. He leaned forward. "For years we built towers that touched the sky, but we forgot the people who laid the bricks. I'm not ashamed of what I did. If that makes shareholders nervous, maybe we're investing in the wrong values." When the meeting adjourned, the tension lingered, but Thomas didn't care. He had once feared losing reputation, but now he feared something far worse, losing what made him feel alive. That evening, Amanda returned from preschool with a backpack full of scribbles and stories. "Look," she said, holding up a crayon drawing. 3 stick figures stood under a tree, Mara, Amanda, and a tall man in a suit. Thomas smiled. "That's quite the artwork." She pointed proudly. "That's you. And that's Mommy. To me. We're a family." Mara, standing in the doorway, blushed. "Amanda, don't trouble him with all that." But Thomas shook his head, his voice soft. "She's not troubling me." He crouched beside Amanda, tracing a finger over the colorful tree. "It's perfect." Amanda grinned. "I'm gonna make 100 of them." He laughed. "Better get more crayons then." Later, when the house quieted, Thomas found Mara sitting in the garden, her shawl wrapped around her shoulders. The air was cool, scented faintly with citrus from the lemon trees she'd insisted on tending herself. He joined her on the bench. "You're out here every night," he said. "Reminds me of home," she replied. "The air feels honest." They sat in silence for a while. Somewhere in the distance, Amanda's faint laughter floated from the open window. Mara's voice was soft when she finally spoke. "You know, back in Jamaica, I used to pray for a crack of kindness. Not a miracle, just a small break in the storm. Something to remind me that the world wasn't cruel through and through." Thomas looked at her, listening. She smiled faintly. "You were that crack, Thomas." The answer I didn't believe would come. He swallowed hard. "I don't know if I deserve that." "Maybe not," she said gently. "But grace ain't about deserving." The words hit deep. He turned away, blinking hard as emotion swelled behind his eyes. For a man who'd faced boardrooms, reporters, and billion-dollar collapses, it was this quiet moment that broke him. The next week, Thomas called a meeting, not with executives this time, but with community leaders. He pitched an idea for a foundation, the Dwayne Fund, named after Mara's late husband. "It'll provide aid to immigrant families," he explained, "especially those working in dangerous jobs or living without support systems." Mara sat in the back of the room, stunned. When the meeting ended, she approached him. "You didn't have to name it after him." "I did," Thomas replied. "He built part of this city. It's time people remember that." Her eyes shimmered. "You're giving him the dignity he never got in life." He smiled. "He earned it." That night, after the foundation papers were signed, they shared dinner together. Nothing extravagant, just home-cooked rice and beans at Mara's insistence. Halfway through the meal, Thomas set his fork down. "Can I tell you something?" She looked up, curious. He took a breath. "I've spent most of my life terrified of being alone. I thought if I filled every minute with work, every room with success, I could outrun the silence. But it just got louder." Mara nodded slowly. "Loneliness is a cruel thing. Makes you think you're whole when you're hollow." He smiled sadly. "And you? What are you afraid of?" She hesitated. "Being a burden. On anyone. I've lived my whole life trying not to take more space than I earned." Thomas leaned forward, his tone soft but firm. "You're not a burden, Mara. You and Amanda, you gave this place something it's never had. A heartbeat." For a long time, neither spoke. The silence between them wasn't empty, it was full of understanding. Later that night, Amanda wandered in, sleepy-eyed, clutching her teddy bear. "You guys still talking?" she mumbled. Mara smiled. "We were just saying good night." Amanda climbed into Thomas's lap without asking, her head resting against his chest. "You're part of our story now," she said drowsily. He smiled, brushing a strand of hair from her forehead. "Is that so?" She nodded, eyes half closed. "We're family now, right?" The words landed with a warmth that filled the room. Thomas looked at Mara, who was watching quietly, her expression soft and knowing. Then he looked back at Amanda and whispered, "Yeah, kid. We are." As the night deepened, the mansion hummed with a different kind of quiet, alive, full and real. Through the window, the city glittered, but Thomas no longer felt apart from it. He was no longer the man in the tower, untouchable and cold. He was part of something rooted, something that grew not from ambition but from love. Amanda stirred in his arms, mumbling in her sleep, "Good night, Mr. Thomas." He whispered back, "Good night, family." And for the first time, the house didn't echo, it answered. Morning sunlight spilled across the hills of Los Angeles, warm and golden, turning the sprawling Livingstone estate into something almost unrecognizable. What had once been a monument to silence now pulsed with laughter, footsteps, and the sound of life returning, real, unmanufactured life. In the backyard, Thomas stood beside Mara and Amanda, sleeves rolled up, a shovel in his hand. The ground was soft and dark, freshly turned. Beside them sat a small sapling, a mango tree, its leaves bright and tender. Amanda clapped her hands. "It's so tiny." Mara smiled, her voice steady now, the rasp of sickness long gone. "It'll grow strong if you take care of it. Just like people." Thomas knelt down, pressing the shovel into the dirt. "Then let's plant it right here, where the sun can reach it every day." Amanda crouched beside him, holding the little tree with both hands as he guided it into the hole. Her small fingers brushed against his, and for a moment he felt something pure, connection without pretense, family without obligation. Mara stepped closer, steadying herself on her cane, and whispered a quiet blessing in Jamaican patois, a prayer for life, growth, and peace. The words were soft, almost musical, blending into the wind. When they finished, the sapling stood firm, its roots buried deep in new soil. Thomas wiped the sweat from his forehead. "There?" he said. "New beginnings." Amanda grinned. "Can we name it?" Mara laughed. "What would you call a mango tree, child?" Amanda thought hard. "Hope." Thomas smiled. "Perfect." In the weeks that followed, hope took root, in the ground and in their lives. Mara's health improved steadily. Her color returned, her laughter became stronger, and her energy came back in ways that surprised even her doctors. She began cooking again, her kitchen filled with the smell of curry, ginger, and fried plantains. Amanda thrived at school. Her teachers called her fearless, always asking questions, always smiling. She brought home finger paintings and paper crowns, proudly showing them off to anyone who'd listen. Thomas's home, once a cold fortress of glass and marble, now hummed with warmth. The staff smiled more. The silence that used to echo through the halls was gone, replaced by piano music, chatter, and Amanda's giggles bouncing down the staircase. And Thomas himself changed. One morning, he stood before a crowd at a press conference. Cameras flashed, microphones angled toward him. But this time, he wasn't there to announce a merger or acquisition. He was unveiling the Livingstone Foundation for Families. "This isn't about charity," he said into the microphone. "It's about responsibility, our shared responsibility, to see the people who build our world. To lift them, not as statistics, but as human beings." Mara watched from the side of the stage, pride glinting in her eyes. Amanda sat on her lap, swinging her legs, completely unaware of the gravity of what was happening. To her, it was simple. Mr. Thomas was helping people, and that was what good people did. Afterward, when reporters shouted questions about redemption and scandal, Thomas smiled politely and said, "Call it whatever you want. I just call it right." That evening, back at the estate, Thomas found Amanda in his office. She sat cross-legged on the carpet, coloring furiously on a sheet of paper. Crayons rolled across the floor like confetti. "What are you working on this time?" he asked, setting his briefcase down. Amanda looked up, beaming. "A surprise." She held up the drawing, a mango tree with 3 stick figures underneath it. One tall man with brown hair, one woman with long braids, and a little girl between them. Above the tree, in crooked letters, she'd written, "My family." Thomas froze, the words lodging somewhere deep in his chest. The simplicity of it, so innocent, so certain, broke him in the gentlest way. He knelt beside her, taking the drawing with careful hands. "You made this for me?" Amanda nodded proudly. "For all of us. So we don't forget." Mara appeared in the doorway, leaning on her cane. "She's been working on that all week." Thomas looked at her, eyes glassy. "It's beautiful." He crossed to his desk, pulled an empty silver frame from a drawer, and slipped the paper inside. When he set it beside his awards and business accolades, it didn't look out of place. It looked right. He stepped back, staring at it for a long moment. "This," he said softly, "is the most valuable thing I've ever owned." Later that night, the three of them walked out to the garden. The mango tree stood under the soft glow of string lights Thomas had hung that morning, its leaves swaying gently in the breeze. Amanda ran ahead, skipping through the grass. "It's growing," she cried, pointing to the small new sprout at its base. Mara smiled. "It's finding its roots." Thomas gazed at the sapling, his voice quiet. "Just like us." Amanda turned to him, her eyes bright in the golden light. "Mr. Thomas," she asked, "are we staying here forever?" He crouched beside her, brushing a stray curl from her face. "There's no until here, Amanda." She blinked. "What's that mean?" "It means this isn't just for now," he said softly. "It's home. As long as you want it to be." Amanda threw her arms around his neck, squeezing tight. "Then I want it forever." He laughed, a sound unguarded and real, and hugged her back. "Forever sounds good to me." Mara watched them, her expression caught somewhere between gratitude and peace. She tilted her face toward the night sky, whispering a quiet thank you to whoever, or whatever, had brought them here. The wind stirred the leaves of the young mango tree, making a soft rustling sound that filled the quiet. Thomas looked up at it, the stars glinting faintly above. The tree stood small but defiant, its roots deep in foreign soil, reaching toward the light. It didn't belong here by nature, but it was thriving anyway. Just like them. And as the night settled around them, warm, alive, and whole, Thomas Livingstone finally understood what all his wealth had failed to teach him. That redemption wasn't something you earned. It was something you nurtured, day by day, choice by choice, until it bloomed. The mango tree swayed gently in the golden light, its leaves whispering in the wind as laughter echoed through the garden, a sound that belonged not to a mansion, but to a home.
Thank you so much for staying with me till the very end of this story. The story isn't just a story about wealth and poverty. It's a reminder that compassion can change lives in ways money never can. Thomas Livingstone thought success meant power, but through Amanda and Mara, he learned that true wealth is measured in kindness, not currency. If this story touched your heart, please take a moment to subscribe, like, and share this video with your friends and loved ones. It helps the channel grow and lets us keep bringing you stories that inspire hope, empathy, and courage. I'll be posting another powerful story tomorrow, so make sure to turn on notifications so you don't miss it. And before you go, check out the previous story showing right here on your screen. It's one you definitely don't want to miss. Until next time, stay kind, stay human, and remember, even the smallest act of love can plant the deepest roots.